He took her beautiful flower pots and he propped open that screen door.
The FBI, Pima County Sheriff, and Florida labs the pros meant to find her haven't caught the scent of her killer yet. They still can't put a name to the DNA trace left at her home. Trust me, it isn't for a lack of trying. They ran it through CODIS, the FBI's system with 19 million offender profiles, just hunting for a single name in the dark. 1 million forensic profiles sit in a database that solved over 750,000 cases, but this one stays cold. It came back as total silence, no match. So they submitted the DNA recovered from deep inside the house to the lab. This was a separate sample, a whole different mystery. That one came back as a dead end as well. We've chewed on this DNA before, but today we're hitting this investigation from a much darker and sharper angle. A single question has been rotting at the edge of this case since the end of March. Ever since Ashleigh Banfield's sources leaked a detail so precise in its dread that it stopped me cold. It made me freeze, forced me to sit with the horror for hours before I was ready to bring it to you. Did the cops bag Nancy's flower pots? You might ask why flower pots, but you need to stay with me. That's the heart of it. Stay close, because after 61 days with no cuffs and no system hits, and 0 confirmed matches from any DNA source, the mystery of who touched what behind her house is a life-or-death question. In the dead of night on February 1st, what happened behind Nancy Guthrie's home might be the only trace of the monster. Nobody dared ask it until day 58. Then, a 30-year SWAT commander went on TV and spoke 3 words. He said 3 words that are going to make every person watching this feel a cold, genuine fury deep in their chest. We're getting there, but context matters. In this game, the details are often as heavy as the lead. Stay with me as we look at this DNA, the facts we've got, and the holes they've left wide open. Let's start at the beginning. If you've followed this, you know there's a mountain of evidence, but it's a mess. Public talk has blurred separate facts together. Let's be precise. Investigators walked into a nightmare on February 1st. When they hit Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills home that morning, they found a crime scene that felt ice cold. There was blood on the doorstep, a Ring camera yanked away, and the back doors were hanging wide open. Sources told Brian Enton the house was immaculate, not a single sign of a struggle inside those quiet rooms. By February 13th, the sheriff finally confirmed they found foreign DNA that didn't belong to Nancy Guthrie. That DNA wasn't hers. It didn't belong to any of her close friends or any family members they checked. That DNA is real, they bagged it, and it doesn't match anyone the investigators have already accounted for. There was no legal reason for that person to be there. The FBI was briefed on the situation immediately. The labs were working, but the phrase collected from the property is a very broad, vague net. It doesn't tell us where or how many samples exist in the evidence lockers right now. We don't know if it's one unknown profile or several, or if the samples are even usable for a match. The sheriff and FBI were careful. In that caution, there's room for the uncertainty that makes this case so hard to stomach. Then came the glove. Found 2 miles away on a roadside, it was bagged and sent away for testing. The FBI checked it. Preliminary tests showed it was similar to the type worn by the masked predator on the footage. That male 5'9" to 5'10" was seen at her door carrying a 25-liter Ozark trail pack. The glove matched his gear. They sent it to Florida and found a profile. They hit CODIS with it, but it came back with absolutely nothing. Just another digital dead end. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed the failure to Fox News. The FBI backed him up that same afternoon. The DNA on that glove didn't match anyone in the system. It was another ghost in the machine. And, critically, this is the part that didn't get nearly enough attention from the press or the public. The forensic truth is buried in the details, and those details are starting to smell like a cover-up. We're looking at a killer who knows how to move in the dark without leaving a name. Every day that passes is another day he's out there, breathing the same air as you and me. It makes you wonder what else the department is keeping quiet while the trail... But critically, this is the part that got less attention than it deserved. The truth hurts. This case smells like copper. The glove DNA doesn't match what was pulled from inside Nancy's house. We've got 2 separate ghosts and 2 different puzzles. The person who left traces inside that house and the guy whose skin was on that glove, they might not be the same monster. That matters. It means investigators are staring down the barrel of more than one nameless shadow in this mess. Even if the lab nails the glove wearer, they're still staring at a second unknown profile to deal with. One answer won't close this book. Then the real headache started, though they kept it quiet as hell. People close to the hunt told the press there's genuine worry about the DNA found inside Nancy's place. There's a real fear those samples won't yield a usable profile for any database comparison at all. One source called the sample weak. Another badge told the news that even weak samples can be boosted. Scientific techniques can enhance it, but the process is a grind. It takes much longer, weeks or months. Sheriff Nanos didn't sugarcoat it. He's busy splitting merged DNA samples pulled from inside the residence right now. He's testing the evidence and then evaluating if any viable material can be used for genetic genealogy. He's checking if anything fits for genealogy or the national database. He's being a cold, hard realist. He's not promising any miracles on a timeline. Fox News found another mess. A mixed DNA sample. That's biological evidence where multiple people are tangled together. You gotta pull those profiles apart first. You can't compare anything until that separation is done. That Florida lab work takes weeks, maybe months. It all depends on how complex that genetic soup is. Sheriff Nanos said it himself on the news. A messy sample could take a year to sort out, 1 whole year of silence while Nancy is gone. She's been gone 61 days. Now we're looking at a 12-month wait for results that might fail. There's no promise it'll produce a usable profile. Cece Moore, the top dog at Parabon Nanolabs, knows. She's a heavyweight expert on genetic genealogy, the tech that finally put the Golden State Killer in a cage. That's the same process that helped break the Brian Koberger case in Idaho. She was direct on News Nation. She told them straight, investigative genealogy only works if the boys in blue have a viable DNA sample. She called that a massive if in this specific case. Let me tell you why that phrase matters. Genealogy is a different beast than the standard database. The federal system uses short tandem repeat testing. It compares 20 genetic markers looking for a direct hit. The guy has to be in there already. He's got to be a convicted criminal or someone busted in a state that requires a DNA spit sample. If he's not in the system, the search just fails. No match means the trail goes dead cold. Genealogy uses single nucleotide polymorphism sequencing, looking at hundreds of thousands of genetic markers to find the truth. It's not looking for a direct hit, but for distant cousins and relatives who share the suspect's blood. It hits databases like GED Match and DNA Justice, the few sites that actually let the law look inside. Together, those databases have under 2 million profiles. The big commercial sites have tens of millions more. Ancestry DNA and 23andMe have the numbers, but they'll fight any badge in court first. They bar law enforcement from searching without a war. Moore says getting a warrant is a legal battle. So, investigative genealogy is the only play forward. The FBI says it's underway, but it needs a profile. It requires a workable genetic signature from the suspect's DNA, and Nancy's home samples might be too dirty. If the sample isn't clean enough, the tech stalls. That's where we're sitting at 61 days. The DNA doesn't lead to a dead end yet, but we don't know what it can tell us. The tools to solve this case only work if the sample holds up under the lab's glare. That's why what happened at the back of Nancy Guthrie's house is the only thing that matters. What if there's another sample, DNA that was never submitted, analyzed, or maybe even collected by the team? What if something is just sitting on that back patio from the night she was taken from us? Understanding what genetic genealogy can actually do is the only way to see the stakes of this investigation. This is where the hunt is pointing, and where the cost of missed evidence becomes a true nightmare. When investigators strike out in the federal database, it's not a failure of the evidence, but a limit of the library. It means the person behind the crime hasn't been booked, processed, or forced to submit their genetic code to a state or federal file yet. We're talking about people who were never arrested or convicted in a way that triggered a mandatory DNA submission under the law. A no-hit isn't an exoneration. It's just a sign that this monster hasn't been tagged by the system before now. It does not say this. When a face is too far gone and a name won't surface, a person stays a ghost. That's exactly where investigative genetic genealogy steps in as our next heavy-hitting tool to break the silence. Don't get it twisted, IgG isn't some magic wand you wave over a crime scene. It demands a viable sample, a piece of the monster left behind that's got enough genetic meat on its bones and hasn't rotted away yet. We need enough readable markers to build a workable SNP profile that actually tells a story. And it's all useless unless at least one relative of the suspect, somebody sharing that same tainted blood, decided to play ball. Even a cousin twice removed has to have voluntarily uploaded their own DNA to one of the 3 specific databases that us law enforcement types are actually allowed to touch. If they didn't, we're just staring at a wall. If we hit a wall on both counts, the IgG process doesn't just die, it stalls out in the shadows. It means we're stuck playing the waiting game, hoping more people upload their data and give us a lead to hunt. Maybe we're waiting for some lab coats to cook up better tech, to fix a partial, degraded sample. But when you're talking about an 84-year-old woman who's been vanished into the thin air for 61 days, waiting is a word that tastes like ash. 61 days is a lifetime when the clock is screaming. At her age, longer is a word that nobody in this investigation is comfortable hearing, because time is the enemy of justice. That's the cold, hard reason why a clean, viable, and uncontaminated sample is the only thing that matters in the dirt right now. It's the difference between a closed case and a cold one. This isn't some high-minded academic theory. It's a brutal operational reality with a deadline written in the steady rot and degradation of biological material. Every second, the evidence is dying. You've got this material sitting out there baking in the unforgiving Arizona sun and wind. If the DNA pulled from inside that house is too low level or too messy to build a usable SNP profile, we're going to need a miracle from another source. If the DNA they pulled off that glove and threw into CODIS comes back with a big fat 0, we're in trouble. If the house DNA is a bust for genealogy, the investigators are going to have to go back to the well for something else. We're looking at a scenario where if the house DNA can't build a profile and the separate hits don't land, those guys in the field are going to be desperate for a new lead to follow. And what if there was another lead? If there was DNA sitting right there on those flower pots, or clinging to the back gate, or smeared on the handle of the screen door places where the shadow moved. If whoever did this put their hands on those surfaces, like Banfield's sources are claiming, and that evidence wasn't bagged and tagged immediately, then we've got a problem. If that source wasn't collected, the mistake is heavy. It means the single best shot we had at nailing this person is already 61 days in the rearview mirror, and the gap is only getting wider. That's a lot of lost ground to make up. That's the crushing weight behind those 3 words from Bob Krieger. It's the whole reason we're standing here today, breaking down exactly what those Banfield sources are whispering in the dark. Let's walk through the details Ashleigh Banfield put out there on her Drop Dead Serious podcast back on day 58 of this nightmare. We're looking at the raw guts of the investigation. This happened back on March 31st, 2026. Now, pay attention to this sourcing note before we go any further, because I'm not about to skip over the fine print in a case this heavy. The stuff Banfield reported is coming from multiple law enforcement sources who are talking off the record. Right now, it hasn't been officially stamped as fact by the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the FBI. The Sheriff's Department is keeping their mouth shut and hasn't publicly confirmed that specific detail about the flower pots yet. We're going to attribute this carefully, because that's how you stay clean on this channel. Remember, Banfield isn't some amateur playing detective on a phone. She's a credentialed journalist with skin in the game. This isn't just more noise or social media garbage being thrown at the wall. She had several sources back each other up on the specific details she laid out. We're treating this as high-level, attributed single-source reporting, and we're not taking it lightly. That means we're putting it out there plainly as what her people are saying. We'll keep it flagged on the screen so you can keep your head on straight and make your own informed call. You're the one who gets to decide how much gravity to give these claims. Now that we've cleared the air on that, here is the grim picture she painted. The back doors at Nancy Guthrie's place weren't just left swinging in the breeze. According to what Banfield's people are saying, someone went out of their way to hold them open on purpose. 2 separate doors, a flimsy screen door and that heavy interior kitchen door, were both propped wide. They weren't just cracked or left unlatched. Someone wanted them open all the way. Banfield laid it out. The back entrance to the kitchen is a 2-step process, with a screen door on the exterior and a solid, heavy door on the inside. A double barrier that was bypassed. When the first investigators stepped onto that scene, her law enforcement sources say both of those doors were standing wide open, propped like an invitation to the dark. And the killer didn't bring his own gear. He used Nancy's own decorative flower pots to do it. Those were the same pots she kept on her back patio to make the place look like home. He didn't grab a stray chair or a rock from the garden or some random junk from the yard. He put his hands on her flower pots and turned them into tools for his work. Think about that. These are heavy objects he had to reach down, grab, and carefully position. He had to be deliberate. He had to touch surfaces that should have held onto his secrets. Those pots have surfaces that catch things. Under the right conditions, a man's hands leave a map of his presence behind in the form of sweat and skin cells. The way Banfield told it, her sources were describing a person who wasn't panicking. This was someone who knew the rhythm of the job and had every move mapped out in his head. He swung that screen door open and wedged it with a flower pot. Then he took more of Nancy's beautiful plants and used them to keep his path clear. He didn't stop there. According to those same sources, he propped the back gate open using the exact same method. It's a signature of someone who's in total control of the space. This tells us it wasn't just about getting through a door. He was opening up the whole damn path. The doors were open, the gate was open, he wanted the way clear. He created a straight shot, a clear corridor from the street, through the yard, and right into the heart of that kitchen. That's the mark of a man who's prepared for anything. This wasn't some desperate guy grabbing a lucky break. This was a predator with a sequence, someone who had already paced out the back of this property and knew the layout by heart. He knew exactly how to stop those doors from clicking shut behind him. In that moment, those flower pots weren't decoration anymore. They were functional tools of the trade, and he used them perfectly. Now, here's the part that really gets under your skin, the intel Banfield got from a very high-level source. This guy didn't just walk in. He prepared the battlefield. A whole string of security cameras and outdoor lights at the property had been smashed to pieces. They were completely destroyed, right? We've got the proof because we saw the wreckage. We saw those spotlights ourselves, just dangling by the wires next to the other back door, the one that leads into the garage. Or maybe it's a storage room, we're still pinning that down. It wasn't just a one-off accident. There were multiple lights, multiple points of failure. This was a systematic blackout designed to hide whatever was coming. Before he ever laid a hand on Nancy, or in the quiet hours while he was closing in, someone moved through the back of that property and murdered the surveillance system. He systematically took out the lights and killed the cameras, making sure that whatever happened next stayed in the shadows where no lens could catch him. A cold blade to the throat, it started at that back entrance, proving we're hunting someone who'd mapped the lenses. A predator who'd crept close enough to the property to pinpoint every single piece of electronic surveillance and neutralized it. This wasn't some amateur swinging blind. This was a professional who'd done his dark reconnaissance. Banfield's take is that this guy was stalking Nancy, haunting the house, and hunting for that back door. He knew which spotlights to kill. This bastard was stalking Nancy and stalking the house like a prize. Finding that unlocked back door, identifying the spotlights that needed to go dark, and mapping the whole damn property. Way before the night of the abduction. That's the profile drawn from what her sources have whispered. If that profile's right, the killer didn't step onto that back porch without knowing how evidence leaves a trail. He'd planned, prepared, and killed the cameras. But there's one thing a ghost can't ever truly scrub away. Cold, hard surfaces. Cameras catch your face, but DNA doesn't care if a lens is watching the crime. DNA's left whenever skin hits a surface. And if at any point during his dark preparation or execution, of the hell he unleashed between January 31st and February 1st, he touched those pots with bare hands. That DNA is screaming on those pots regardless of any camera. Gloves at the front, but what about the back? Let me choose my words carefully here, because in this business, precision is the only thing that matters. At the front of Nancy Guthrie's home, a doorbell camera was rolling. The FBI grabbed that footage. They put out images and a description. That lens saw him. It saw the mask and the backpack he carried. The footage shows his hands were gloved. That's a fact confirmed by multiple heavy-hitting mainstream news sources. The masked ghost at the front of Nancy's home wore gloves, but now, look at the back of the house. According to Banfield's people, the cameras were smashed and lights killed. There wasn't a single working eye, no electronic surveillance watching the back patio. That raises the one question I want you to feel in your gut. Was he as careful in the dark as he was out front? Up front, he wore gloves. He knew the camera. He'd prepared for it. He'd already neutered or planned around the Ring camera and came to the door protected. Out back, he was moving heavy objects. He was hauling flower pots and shoving them up against the doors. He was grabbing a gate, working fast in the shadows where he thought no electronic eye could ever see him. Did he keep those gloves on the whole time? Or did he pull them off when the work got heavy? Maybe he felt safe in a blind spot, or maybe gloves just made the heavy lifting too damn difficult. Or maybe in the dark, rushing his plan, he made that one fatal mistake that even the best planners make. I'm being clear here, this is an analytical lead we don't know. There's zero confirmed public info yet. telling us if he was gloved at the back of the property. But this isn't just some rhetorical exercise. If those flower pots are holding his DNA and it was never bagged, then what Banfield sources described as a horrifying detail is actually the most forensically massive piece of evidence in this entire godforsaken investigation. And nobody's talking about it officially. Let me say it again. If he gripped those pots with bare hands, and if those pots weren't bagged for the lab, then the DNA of the man who took Nancy Guthrie is sitting on that back porch right now, 61 days later, rotting under the brutal Arizona sun. That's not some dramatic line. It's a forensic nightmare. The plans shift, the blood, and that front door. Now, let me give you the full, ugly picture of how the evidence says this bloody night went down. Because the flower pot detail isn't some isolated fluke, it's a gear inside a much larger, darker machine. A plan that, according to several sources, shifted drastically somewhere between the back patio and the front porch. And that shift changes everything. When the law arrived, the house was, according to Enton's source, completely immaculate. Most rooms were clean, totally undisturbed. The source claimed there wasn't a single sign of struggle inside. Brian Enton noted this fits perfectly with what Savannah told Hoda Kotb during their televised interview. When the family walked in the next morning, they didn't even know they were standing in a crime scene. They figured maybe it was a medical emergency, maybe an ambulance crew had hauled Nancy out on a stretcher. Because nothing inside that house screamed foul play. On the surface, everything looked perfectly normal, until they saw her phone and purse left behind, until they found the fresh blood on the front. Blood on the doorstep tells a story of a plan falling apart. Ripped Ring camera, propped doors, clean house. The air was thick with dread. Blood out front. Ring camera destroyed. Those four grim facts together describe a very specific, very violent sequence of events that night. Someone broke in likely through the back, through those kitchen doors that were already propped wide open and waiting in the shadows. They ghosted through the house without making a scene. They found Nancy, and then they started moving her toward a dark, final exit. Banfield's theory, and she's clear this is just her own speculation built from the dark details her sources fed her, is pretty damn grim, is that the original planned exit was the back out through the kitchen doors, through the propped gate, and away from the world, the street, away from any remaining cameras, away from the part of the property that any neighbor walking or driving past would actually ever see. But Savannah Guthrie told us something vital about her mother that directly complicates that killer's escape plan and his getaway route. On a good day, she said Nancy could walk to the mailbox. Problem is, not many days were ever really good days. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old with a ruined back. She had limited mobility. There was no way she could have been expected to walk any real distance through a pitch-black backyard, through a gate, across rough terrain to wherever a getaway vehicle was waiting. Banfield put it plainly. Did the killer not plan for that? Did he hit this property with a route mapped out that assumed Nancy would be able to walk further than she actually could? Did he really expect to walk her out under her own power? Under her own limited power, and then realize when he found her that it wasn't going to work? Because she didn't come out the back. We know that the blood is at the front. Whatever happened, whatever violent contact, whatever struggle, whatever moment spilled that blood right there. It happened right there at the front door. The door he'd already disabled the camera on, the door he hadn't originally planned to use as his exit route. Originally planned to use as his exit. That is a plan change. And in this business, a plan change means someone got sloppy. And plan changes are deadly for the person making them. Because when you've prepared for one scenario and the scenario suddenly shifts on you, when you are improvising under heavy pressure in the dark, you do things you didn't practice. You start leaving pieces of yourself behind in the dirt. You take risks you didn't calculate. You touch things you weren't supposed to touch. He touched those flower pots at the back. He staged that corridor before he ever stepped into the house. He was definitely wearing gloves when the camera caught him at the front door. Camera caught him at the front. But those flower pots are from the back, the unmonitored back, where the plan was still in motion early on. The plan he had prepared for was the plan he had already abandoned by the time blood appeared on the front step. This was a total mess. Did the gloves stay on through all of it? Through the back patio setup? Through entering the house? Through moving Nancy through the dark? Nancy through the change of plan, through the front door, through the exit, I don't know. And 61 days later, the clock is ticking. As of the moment this video was produced, neither apparently did a 30-year SWAT commander. The reveal, Bob Krieg, is the real deal. Krieg is a retired SWAT commander from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. He's got more than 30 years in law enforcement under his belt. He's been one of the most credible and consistent expert voices on this case, appearing multiple times on Brian Enton's investigation show lately. Times on Brian Enton Investigates, speaking in detail with Parade magazine and referenced in the context of Banfield's ongoing reporting on the case. He is not some random commentator pulled in for a hot take. He's a person with deep institutional knowledge of exactly how things work, exactly how investigations like this are run, in exactly this jurisdiction, by exactly the people working this case. He knows their every move. He has talked about evidence. He has talked about terrain, walking the brush behind Nancy's home with Brian Enton and explaining the grim details. It's home with Brian Enton and explaining why the back route was highly improbable for anyone trying to carry an elderly woman out of there. He has talked about leads, about electronic evidence, and about the role of reward money in shaking loose secrets from people who know, information from people who might know something. He has been thoughtful, measured, and credible throughout this entire dark case. When the flower pot detail emerged publicly, when Banfield's reporting on day 58 raised the question of what those pots had on them exactly and who had handled them, Bob Krieg was asked directly, asked specifically, were those flower pots ever actually collected as evidence for the lab? Understand what that question means in a case like this at a crime scene with the massive resources this investigation has had at hand. FBI resources, Pima County resources, 40 to 50,000 leads worked, forensic labs contracted, every expert is on the clock, a reward pool over $1 million. The question of whether objects that a suspect allegedly physically handled were collected as evidence matters. Were collected as evidence should only have one damn answer. One answer, and it shouldn't require even 3 seconds of heavy, focused, investigative thought. That answer should be yes. Bob Krieg is a 30-year SWAT commander. He knows exactly what real evidence collection is supposed to look like. He has been in the rooms where these decisions get made. He has worked scenes where every single object that a suspect potentially touched gets bagged, tagged, and sent to a lab. That is not a high bar to clear. That is standard protocol in any serious professional investigation. You collect the potentially handled surfaces. You let the lab sort it out. You do not wait around for the killer to vanish. Blood dries fast. He had 58 days to think, yet he never once said yes. He didn't say, of course. Standard procedure should have naturally handled that mess on day 1. No questions asked. His reply was just 3 words. I hope they did. I hope they did. Let me say that again plainly. This retired SWAT commander has over 30 years of law enforcement experience and knows this entire jurisdiction well. He knows the team work in this job, yet he was asked if a specific piece of potential evidence was ever bagged, and his answer was just hope. Not facts, not certainty, not assurance, just a whole lot of hope. I want to be real specific about what I'm not saying here. I'm not claiming the flower pots weren't grabbed. I can't confirm a thing from public records. We don't have the official inventory of what they hauled away yet. We don't know what left that back patio and what stayed. This is still a very active, bleeding investigation. Forensics doesn't always show their hand to the public. Maybe there's a world where those pots were properly tagged. They could have been bagged on February 1st and sent to the Florida lab where they're sitting in a queue now. That'd be the right result. It'd mean the detectives were way ahead of the question before anyone started to ask. But Bob Kreider didn't tell us that. When he had the chance to say they did it, he stayed silent. He had the floor to reassure the public and the Guthrie family that every scrap of evidence was locked down. He didn't offer a lick of comfort. He just said he hoped. A 30-year SWAT vet saying he hopes isn't nothing. That's a specific answer from a specific kind of man. It's the talk of someone who isn't sure of himself. Imagine the doubt it takes for a guy with that much tactical training and inside knowledge to resort to hope. He knows the SOP. He knows how it should have gone, and the best he could say was he hoped it did. That's the void. 61 days with no cuffs, no named suspects, and DNA evidence that's likely turning into useless dust. That void isn't some tiny paperwork error. That gap is the whole damn case. Let me paint the forensic picture. This is where the flower pot issue stops being a procedural concern and becomes a nightmare. DNA rots away. That isn't just tough talk or a fancy phrase. It's a cold physical fact that every lab rat understands. Every cop in this field knows that biological sludge left on a surface starts dying the second it hits air. You bake it in heat, hit it with UV rays, rain, and humidity. It doesn't last, it just breaks down. The window for getting a workable sample from an unprotected surface is short. That clock is always ticking down. Tucson, Arizona isn't a gentle place for evidence. That desert heat alone is a major factor for samples left out. Constant UV exposure eats evidence alive, and it's been 61 long days since anyone checked Nancy Guthrie's back patio. Someone touched those flower pots in the dark. Let me tell you what that window looks like in real terms. Look at the Koberger case in Idaho. They pulled good DNA off a knife sheath left at the scene there. That sheath was indoors and protected. Stuff left outside in the wind and the dirt? That's a different clock. Anything left out there just rots away much faster. C.C. Moore, who heads the genetic genealogy, said it plainly. She's cracked cases decades old, but without a solid, viable DNA sample, her investigative tools are just useless toys. It doesn't matter how fancy the database is, or if you've got millions of profiles logged. It won't mean nothing. If the sample can't kick out a workable SNP profile, the database is a paperweight. It won't help you. The samples they've got from this investigation right now might already be too filthy to get the job done. The glove was a ghost in CODIS, and that glove DNA didn't match the samples found inside the house. We're chasing two separate unknowns now. The DNA from the house is likely a low-level or messy mixed sample. We're talking weeks, maybe months, before the Florida lab can even start to pull those strands apart for us. They're working the case, but even the sheriff admits they're taking their time. And time is a luxury they lack. In this mess, leaving a potentially perfect DNA sample out on a back patio isn't just a detail, it's central. It could be the key. Think about how they caught the Golden State Killer. They had DNA from the scene. They couldn't match it in CODIS. They used GED match, found distant relatives, and built a tree of potential monsters. They narrowed it to a neighborhood and then a suspect. Here's the gritty part that most people always overlook. They didn't ask. They swabbed his car door handle and dug through his trash for a used tissue sample. They finally secured a fresh, clean sample from an unprotected surface. That was the final nail in his coffin. Blood has a way of soaking into the concrete and staying there. He had no clue anyone was looking. A door handle? Some trash, ordinary junk the killer touched. He didn't think about who'd come hunting. A ceramic flower pot on a dark patio, moved by a ghost who figured the cameras were all blind that night. No lens is usually the stuff that wasn't on the first list. It's that one tiny, fatal detail the suspect didn't calculate in his sick, arrogant head. He touched something when he thought the heavy lifting was finished. That evidence was just sitting there, waiting for a detective to finally think to ask. Bob Krager said he prayed someone asked. On day 58, with 61 days of silence behind us, the official answer on those flower pots hasn't arrived. The word on whether they were bagged or run through a lab hasn't come from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, nor has it come from the FBI. The only gritty voice that actually weighed in when we asked directly was a veteran 30-year SWAT commander who gave us a sliver of hope, where this leaves us. Let me explain what 61 days of cold hell looks like from out here. It's vital to hold on to two heavy things at once. The dry procedural question we just chewed on for an hour, and the raw, bleeding human reality sitting right underneath. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived with brutal back pain. She loved her back patio. She kept those flower pots out there, tending and arranging them to make her home beautiful. She had a place in the Catalina foothills where she'd grab dinner with family and play games. She was just living her own quiet, peaceful American life. On the cold night of January 31st, she went home after a family dinner. Her daughter Annie's family dropped her off around 9:45 that same evening. That was the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie. What happened next in the dark is the central mystery of this entire investigation we're tracking. In the dark hours between her going inside and her Ring camera cutting out at 1:47 in the morning, someone came. Someone who'd planned this nightmare. They found that back door unlocked, smashed the cameras, and propped the doors open with her flower pots to move through that house without leaving signs of struggle. Someone opened the gate and ghosted through the rooms. They came out the front with her blood on the doorstep, wearing a mask and gloves. On the one camera still running, they were just a shadow. 61 days later, we still don't know who that monster is, despite the heavy legwork. 40 to 50,000 tips followed. $100,000 in federal reward money, $1 million more from the Guthrie family's own pockets. That brings the total blood money to approximately $1.2 million with incentives. Forensic labs in Florida are currently sweating over the DNA. The samples are messy, partial, mixed, low-level junk. Investigative genetic genealogy is underway right now. No CODIS hit on the glove they found. There is no confirmed usable profile from inside the house. And those flower pots on the porch, a veteran commander can only hope they were collected. If you've been riding with us since before the episode counter hit double digits, you already know the architecture of what happened during that violent night. You know the timeline, the suspect's description, the Walmart backpack. You know the evidence that led somewhere and the leads that just died in the dirt. You know about the genealogy and the reward, and Savannah's interview where she said the family is blowing on the dying embers of hope for Nancy. You know it all. But you need to sit with the quiet weight of the flower pot question because it doesn't sound loud or dramatic. It's not some explosive break in the case. It's not a named suspect, a fresh arrest, or a press conference where Sheriff Nanos claims victory. It is just 3 words from a 30-year SWAT commander who couldn't say yes. And sometimes that is the most haunting thing here. It's not a loud failure or a headline, it's just a man with 30 years of experience who knows how this machinery is supposed to work. He's spent his whole career doing exactly this. And the best he can give you is hope. There's a version where those pots were grabbed. Maybe they're in a lab right now, where the DNA they carry has already been compared, submitted, and processed by the technicians in white coats. Maybe the question I raised was answered weeks ago, and the answer is sitting in an active file that investigators are working right this second. I want that version to be real, I really do. But the question is out in the open now, staring us in the face like a ghost. Whether those pots were taken or not, whether the answer is in a Florida lab or baking in the Tucson sun, the killer made a move. The man who snatched Nancy Guthrie might have made one mistake. One moment he thought nobody was watching, one surface he touched without thinking of us. He didn't think about a detective looking 61 days later. If nobody looked, if those pots are still on that patio untouched, then we've lost. If they're unanalyzed, then one of the best chances to identify the person who took an 84-year-old woman in the night is already compromised. That's not a theory. That's the narrow window this case is working in right now, and we're going to keep following the trail of blood. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, call it in. Every second counts when you're hunting a monster who thinks he got away. Blood don't wash off a guilty conscience. Whether the truth's in a Florida lab or Tucson's heat, Nancy's kidnapper surely made a fatal mistake. Maybe it was a single moment he thought nobody was looking, or a surface he gripped without thinking about who'd come hunting 61 days later. And if nobody went hunting, if those pots are still sitting out on that patio, untouched and ignored, then we're losing our best lead. That was likely the strongest chance we had to identify the cold-blooded shadow that dragged an 84-year-old woman from her bedroom in the dark. Snatching her in the dead of night ain't just a theory. That's the brutal reality we're working with right now, and we're gonna keep pushing. If you've got any real info about what happened to Nancy Guthrie or the person who took her, don't stay silent. Anything at all, even a small detail that feels wrong or something you're unsure about, you've got to call the FBI and tell them everything. Call the tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can also submit those tips online at tips.fbi.gov. The Pima County Sheriff's Department's got their own tip portal. You'll find that link waiting in the description right below. Nancy's family is putting up a $1 million reward for any information that finally brings her back home to them. The FBI's put up another $100,000 on top. That brings the total reward pool to roughly $1.2 million. Someone's got a secret. Someone saw something. 61 days into this nightmare, every single tip and every loose thread is still worth a pull. If you followed this channel from the jump, you know we ain't going anywhere. We'll be right here whether there's news or just more silence. Nancy Guthrie isn't just another headline for the news cycle. She's a mother and a grandmother whose life matters more than a story. Her family is still waiting for answers. Nancy Guthrie's still missing, the investigation's active, and those flower pots are still a massive question. Stay with us.